The cold was a constant companion. It lived in the thin soles of her shoes, seeping up from the cracked pavement. It clung to the threadbare fabric of her coat, a coat that had seen too many winters. But worst of all, it lived deep inside her, a permanent chill in her bones that no amount of tea or blankets could ever seem to reach. Elara pulled the collar of her coat tighter, a useless gesture against the wind that sliced through the alley like a blade. Another day done. Another day survived. She carried the scent of the school cafeteria with her, boiled vegetables, cheap disinfectant, and the faint, sweet smell of the chocolate milk she served to the children. It was a smell of abundance, of warmth and noise and life. It was a world she stood on the edge of, serving its bounty but never partaking. Her stomach twisted into a familiar, painful knot. Hunger was another constant companion. It was a dull ache that sharpened into a clawing emptiness as the day wore on. She had learned to ignore it, to push it down, to think of it as a low, humming noise in the background of her life, a necessary sacrifice. Her apartment was a single room at the top of a crumbling building. The lock was flimsy, the window rattled with every gust of wind, and the heating was a distant, clanking memory. But it was hers, a tiny, precarious fortress, against a world that had tried to swallow her whole. She dropped her keys into a small, chipped bowl by the door. The sound was unnervingly loud in the silence. Everything was silent now. She remembered a house filled with shouting, with the sound of breaking glass, with the heavy, terrifying tread of his footsteps on the stairs. The silence of her small room was a blessing, a balm. But sometimes, in the dead of night, it felt just as suffocating. Tonight, the hunger was sharper than usual. She had given away her own lunch again. A small dry roll and a bruised apple. It wasn't much, but it was all she had allowed herself. She had given it to the boy, Leo. A small, quiet boy with his father's serious eyes and a universe of loneliness swirling within them. He was always neat, his uniform perfectly pressed, his hair impeccably combed. He came from a world of wealth Elara could barely imagine, dropped off each morning in a sleek black car that whispered of power and money. But his lunchbox was often a testament to neglect, not a lack of food, but a lack of care. Perfectly portioned, clinically packaged, assembled by someone who measured nutrition but not love. It was the lunch of a busy, absent parent. Elara had seen it 1,000 times, and she saw the way Leo would pick at it, his small shoulders slumped. He never complained. He was a ghost at the boisterous lunch table, present but not truly there. So she had started small, an extra scoop of mashed potatoes, a second bread roll, a carton of chocolate milk she slipped onto his tray when no one was looking. She would lean in close, her voice a low murmur, just for him. "A little extra to help you grow strong," she'd say, her smile tired but genuine. At first he had looked at her with suspicion, his big, dark eyes wide with uncertainty. He was a child taught to be wary. But day after day, her quiet kindness chipped away at his defenses. He started to look for her in the lunch line. A small, tentative smile would touch his lips when he saw her. Today, he had looked especially small, especially lost. There were faint, lavender shadows under his eyes. When he reached her, she saw that his expensive lunchbox held only a pre-packaged sandwich that looked dry and unappetizing, and a single juice box. Her own lunch, the sad little roll and the apple, sat on a napkin behind the counter. Without a second thought, she had wrapped them in a fresh napkin and tucked them into his bag as he was looking away. "A little secret snack for later," she had whispered. The gratitude in his eyes was a warmth that spread through her chest, momentarily chasing away the cold. It was a feeling more nourishing than any food. It had to be, because now, in her cold, empty room, the warmth was gone, and the hunger was a ravenous beast. She opened her cupboard, a half-empty box of crackers, a jar of instant coffee, 2 tea bags. She boiled water in a small, dented pot on her single hot plate. A cup of weak tea would be her dinner. Again. She sank onto her thin mattress, the cup warming her trembling hands. The trembling wasn't just from cold or hunger. It was from a deep, pervasive exhaustion. The exhaustion of a body running on empty. The exhaustion of a spirit that had been battered and bruised and was only just beginning to believe it was safe. She thought of him, her ex-husband, Mark. The memories were ghosts that haunted her waking hours and her dreams, his charming smile that could turn to a snarl in an instant, the way he'd isolated her from her friends, her family, the way he'd taken control of her money, her life, until she had nothing left that was her own. He had hollowed her out, piece by piece, until all that remained was a fragile shell. Leaving had taken every ounce of strength she possessed. She had escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of terror. This small room, this menial job, this life of quiet lack, it was the price of her freedom, and she paid it every single day. But as she sipped her tea, the image of Leo's small, grateful face pushed the ghosts away. That small connection, that flicker of warmth, it was the one thing that made the gnawing emptiness bearable. It was the one thing that felt like hope. And for now, it was enough. Liam Sterling stared at the report on his desk, but the numbers blurred into a meaningless jumble. His mind was elsewhere. It was in the car, on the ride home from school, listening to his son. He ran a hand over his face, the weariness of the day settling deep into his bones. He was the CEO of a global tech empire, a man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single decision. He could build empires of glass and steel, but he couldn't seem to build a happy life for his own child. His wife, Sarah, had been the heart of their home. She had filled it with laughter, with the smell of baking, with a warmth that had radiated into every corner. Since her death 2 years ago, the house had fallen silent. The warmth had receded, leaving behind a sterile, echoing emptiness that mirrored the one in his own chest. He had thrown himself into his work, believing that providing for Leo was the same as caring for him. He hired the best nannies, the most efficient housekeepers. He ensured Leo had the best of everything. Everything except a father, not a real one, not the way Sarah had been a real mother. He was a provider, a protector, a distant orbiting moon to his son's small, lonely planet. The conversation from the car replayed in his mind. Leo had been unusually chatty, his small voice piping up from the back seat. "Dad, the lunch lady gives me extra food." Liam's brow had furrowed. He pictured a stern, hair-netted woman forcing Brussels sprouts on his son. "Is she making you eat it?" "No," Leo said, his tone matter-of-fact. "She says it's a secret. She gives me extra potatoes, and sometimes a roll. Today she gave me her apple." Her apple. The words had struck a strange chord in Liam. It was such a small, personal detail. Not an extra serving from a vat of school-provided food, but her apple. "Why does she do that, Leo?" he had asked, his eyes meeting his son's in the rearview mirror. Leo had shrugged, a gesture so full of childish innocence it made Liam's chest ache. "She says I look like I need it. She's nice, Dad. Her name is Elara. She has sad eyes." Sad eyes. Her apple. The details painted a picture he didn't understand. He paid a premium for the school's meal plan, ensuring Leo had access to the best organic, nutritionally balanced options. Why would a lunch lady feel the need to supplement his meals? And with her own food? A flicker of annoyance had been his first reaction. Was the school staff implying he wasn't feeding his son properly? Was this some misguided act of pity? But the annoyance was quickly replaced by something else. Curiosity, and a faint, unfamiliar stirring of concern for this woman with sad eyes. He had promised Leo he would look into it, and Liam Sterling always kept his promises. The next day he cleared his afternoon schedule. His assistant was baffled. "Mr. Sterling, you have the quarterly review with the Tokyo board." "Postpone it," Liam had said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Something has come up." He drove his own car to the school, not the chauffeured town car. He felt conspicuous as he walked through the cheerful, primary-colored hallways. A man in a $4,000 suit did not belong here. He found the cafeteria, a cacophony of shouting children and clattering trays. He stood near the entrance, feeling like an intruder. He scanned the serving line, his eyes searching. And then he saw her. She was not what he had expected. She was younger, for one, and thinner. There was a fragility about her, a sense of being worn down, like a stone smoothed by a relentless river. Her uniform, though clean, seemed to hang off her slender frame. But it was her eyes that held his attention. Leo was right. They were sad. Not just sad, but haunted. They held a deep, profound sorrow that seemed at odds with her gentle smile as she served a little girl a scoop of peas. He watched as Leo approached the line. He saw the woman's entire demeanor change. Her smile became real, a genuine light that momentarily chased the shadows from her eyes. She leaned down, said something that made Leo smile back, and placed an extra item on his tray. Liam stayed, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, long after the lunch rush was over. He watched as the staff began to clean up. He watched as the woman, Elara, meticulously wiped down every counter. And then he watched as she finally sat down at an empty table in the corner, her back to the room. She pulled out a small, crumpled paper bag. From it, she took a single slice of white bread. Nothing else. Just one piece of bread. She ate it slowly, deliberately, as if trying to make it last. Then she drank a glass of water. That was her lunch. The realization hit Liam with the force of a physical blow. It was a punch to the gut that left him breathless. She wasn't giving Leo extra food because she thought he was neglected. She was giving Leo her food. She was starving herself to make sure his son, a boy who had everything, felt a moment of warmth, a flicker of care. The sheer, selfless kindness of it was staggering. It was something so pure, so fundamentally good, that it shamed him. It shamed his wealth, his power, his own emotional negligence. He felt a hot surge of anger. Anger at a system that would allow this to happen. Anger at a world that could break someone with such gentle eyes. And a deep, burning anger at himself for being so blind for so long. He stepped out of the shadows. He walked across the empty cafeteria, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. She heard him and turned, her eyes widening in alarm. She looked like a startled fawn, ready to bolt at the slightest threat. She clearly recognized him as Leo's father. Fear flickered across her face. She thought she was in trouble. He stopped a few feet from her table. He kept his voice low, gentle. He didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. "Are you Elara?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded, her throat working. She couldn't seem to find her voice. She clutched her hands in her lap, her knuckles white. "My son, Leo. He told me about you," Liam began, choosing his words carefully. "He told me you've been very kind to him." Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. A flush of shame colored her pale cheeks. "I'm sorry, sir, Mr. Sterling. He looked so... I won't do it again. Please, I need this job." Her voice was a fragile whisper, laced with desperation. The plea tore through him. She thought he was here to punish her. He shook his head, taking a careful step closer. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, an act of de-escalation, an attempt to meet her at her level. "You're not in trouble," he said, his voice softer than he had used in years. "I'm not here to complain. I'm here to understand." He gestured vaguely at the empty table, at the crumpled paper bag. "My son told me you gave him your apple yesterday, and that you give him extra food every day." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "And I just watched you eat a single piece of bread for lunch." A tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She seemed frozen by shame and fear. "I'm fine," she whispered, the words a transparent lie. "No," Liam said, his voice firm but still gentle. "You're not, and I'm not going to pretend you are." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. He was a man used to solving problems, to taking decisive action. And this was a problem he felt a visceral, undeniable need to solve. "This job," he said, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "Working here, in this cafeteria, it's not enough, is it?" She flinched but didn't deny it. Her silence was a confession. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "It's not charity, it's a job offer. I need a household manager, someone to cook, to run the house, to make sure Leo has proper meals made with care." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What? Me? But I don't." "The pay would be 5 times what you make here," he continued, cutting through her stammering protests. "And it would include lodging, a private suite of rooms in my home." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the desperate hope warring with a deep-seated fear. She was afraid of him, of his world. She was afraid of the offer itself. It was too much, too fast. It was a kindness she felt she didn't deserve. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this?" Liam looked at her, at the raw vulnerability in her haunted eyes. He thought of his lonely son. He thought of his cold, empty house. He thought of the single slice of bread. And he gave her the only answer that felt true. "Because my son said you have sad eyes," he said softly. "And because for the first time in a very long time, he came home from school, happy." He stood up, pulling a business card from his wallet. He placed it on the table in front of her. "There's no pressure," he said. "Think about it. The offer is real. Call me when you've decided." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone at the table, with the small, white card that represented an impossible choice, a lifeline, or another cage. She stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs, the single tear on her cheek finally beginning to feel cold. The card sat on her small, wobbly table for 2 days. It was a stark, white rectangle in the gray, faded world of her room. Liam Sterling, CEO, Sterling Corp. The name itself felt heavy, powerful. It was a symbol of a universe she had never been welcome in. She picked it up a dozen times, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach. His offer was an act of charity, she told herself. Pity. He saw a pathetic, starving woman and threw money at the problem. But then she would remember his eyes. They weren't filled with pity. They were filled with something else. A seriousness, an intensity, a flicker of his own sadness that she had recognized. And she remembered his words. Because my son came home happy. The thought of Leo, of his small, trusting smile, was the counterweight to her fear. The job he offered, it was a chance to actually cook for the boy, to make sure he had more than just packaged sandwiches, to fill his world with the smell of freshly baked cookies and warm soup. It was a nurturing instinct she had suppressed for so long, a deep-seated need to care for someone. But to go to his house? To live there? It felt like stepping into the lion's den. Her last experience living in a man's beautiful house had ended with her fleeing for her life. Mark's house had been a gilded cage, each beautiful object a reminder of her imprisonment. She had learned to associate wealth and power with danger and control. On the third day, her landlord knocked on the door. He was a sour man with a perpetually disappointed expression. "Rent's late," he grunted, not meeting her eyes. 2 weeks. You got it or not?" She didn't. She had used the last of her money to pay a fraction of an old medical bill, a phantom limb from her previous life that still ached. I'll have it by the end of the week," she stammered. He scoffed. "That's what you said last week. End of the week or you're out. I'm not running a charity." The word charity echoed in her mind. The landlord's threat was the final push. She had no choice. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. With a trembling hand, she dialed the number on the card. His voice was calm and professional on the other end. "Sterling." "Mr. Sterling? It's Elara, from the school." There was a slight pause. "I'm glad you called," he said, and his voice seemed to soften. "Have you thought about my offer?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." He arrived an hour later, not in the sleek black car, but in a discreet dark SUV. He didn't send a driver. He came himself. He helped her pack her few belongings into a single worn suitcase and a cardboard box. He didn't comment on the sparseness of her room or the poverty of her possessions. He simply picked up the box, his expression unreadable, and carried it downstairs as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The drive to his house was a journey into another dimension. They left the gritty city streets behind, moving into sprawling suburbs where the houses grew into mansions, set back from the road behind pristine lawns and iron gates. His home was less a house and more a modern fortress of glass, stone, and mahogany. It was breathtakingly beautiful and achingly empty. The ceilings were impossibly high, the furniture was minimalist and expensive, and every surface gleamed. But there were no photos on the walls, no clutter of life, no soul. It was a magnificent, sterile museum. Elara felt herself shrink as she stepped inside. She was a stray cat brought into a palace, terrified of tracking dirt on the marble floors. A woman in a crisp uniform, the housekeeper, appeared and took her suitcase. Liam dismissed her with a nod. "Leo is at a tutoring session," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast entryway. "He'll be back soon. Let me show you to your rooms." He led her up a wide, floating staircase to a separate wing of the house. He opened a door to a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire apartment. There was a sitting room with a plush sofa, a small kitchenette, a bedroom with a bed piled high with soft pillows, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. "I hope this is acceptable," he said. Elara could only nod, overwhelmed. Acceptable? It was a fantasy. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool granite of the kitchenette counter. She felt like an imposter, a fraud. "The kitchen is downstairs," he explained, his tone all business now. "The housekeeper, Maria, handles the cleaning, but the cooking will be your responsibility. Leo's school lunches, after-school snacks, and our family dinners. We can discuss menus and dietary needs later. For now, just get settled." He left her there, closing the door softly behind him. Elara sank onto the edge of the enormous bed. The silence was absolute. It was a weighted silence, heavy with wealth and unspoken sorrow. She felt more alone here, in this palace, than she had in her tiny, cold room. She was unpacking her few clothes into the vast walk-in closet when she heard a small noise at the door. It was Leo. He stood in the doorway, clutching a tablet, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of her in his house. He didn't smile. He just watched her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He was the gatekeeper to this new world. "Hello, Leo," Elara said softly, her heart doing a nervous flutter. He didn't answer. He just stared at her, then at her worn suitcase, then back at her. He was trying to figure out her place in his world. "Your dad, he hired me to cook for you," she explained. Leo took a tentative step into the room. "Are you going to live here now?" he asked, his voice small. "Yes," she said, "if that's okay with you." He gave a tiny, non-committal shrug and retreated from the doorway, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. The first few days were a delicate dance. Elara moved through the house like a ghost, terrified of being in the way. She learned the geography of the enormous, state-of-the-art kitchen. She found it stocked with every ingredient imaginable, a chef's paradise. She started simply. For Leo's first after-school snack, she baked chocolate chip cookies from scratch. The warm, sweet smell was the first thing that had ever made the house feel remotely like a home. Leo came into the kitchen, drawn by the scent. He stood by the island, watching her pull the golden brown cookies from the oven. "My mom used to make those," he said, his voice quiet. Elara's heart clenched. "I know," she said gently. "Your dad mentioned they were her specialty." She had asked Liam. It was a risk, mentioning his late wife, but she needed a bridge to his son. She placed a warm cookie on a plate with a glass of milk and pushed it toward him. He ate it in silence, his small brow furrowed in concentration. When he was done, he looked up at her. "They're almost as good as hers," he said. It was the highest compliment she could have imagined. It was the first crack in his wall of reserve. Dinners were stiff, formal affairs at a dining table that could seat 20. Liam would sit at one end, Elara at the other, with Leo between them like a small island. Liam would ask Leo about his day, his voice polite but distant. He rarely spoke to Elara directly, his interactions with her brief and professional. He seemed to have retreated behind his CEO persona, as if regretting his moment of emotional impulse in the cafeteria. Elara felt the chill of the house seeping back into her bones. She was an employee, a well-paid one, but an employee nonetheless. She focused on Leo. She learned he hated carrots but loved broccoli if it was roasted with cheese. she discovered he was fascinated by planets and could name all of Jupiter's moons. She found one of his favorite action figures with a broken arm and, using a small kit from the junk drawer, carefully glued it back together. She left the mended toy on his nightstand. She never mentioned it. The next evening, she found a piece of paper slipped under her door. It was a drawing, a crayon rendering of 3 figures holding hands, a very tall man, a small boy in the middle, and a woman with a yellow, smiling sun for a head. Underneath, in shaky, childish letters, was written, "Dad, Leo, and Elara." She sank to the floor, clutching the drawing to her chest. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of sorrow or fear, but of overwhelming, heart-cracking gratitude. It was a gift, a symbol. It was a child's quiet declaration of acceptance. She had found a crack in the walls of the magnificent, empty fortress. And for the first time, a tiny, fragile ray of light was beginning to shine through. The insomnia was a familiar ghost. Liam stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his study, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn, illuminated by the cold, bluish light of the moon. The house was silent. It was always silent at this hour. A vast, echoing mausoleum to a life he had lost. He hadn't slept a full night in 2 years. Not since Sarah. Sleep offered no rest, only a landscape of memories he wasn't strong enough to face. So he worked. Or he stared into the darkness, nursing a glass of whiskey, letting the quiet press in on him. But tonight, the quiet felt different. It was softer somehow, less empty. He knew why. It was her, Elara. He had brought her here on an impulse, a knee-jerk reaction to a problem he could solve with money. That's what he'd told himself. It was a transaction. He needed a reliable person to care for his son. She needed a job and a safe place to live. But it was already becoming so much more than that. He saw the small changes everywhere. The scent of baking that now lingered in the air. The small vase of wildflowers on the kitchen counter, picked from the edge of the woods. The way the house was slowly, imperceptibly, starting to breathe again. He saw the change in Leo most of all. His son was smiling more. He was talking more. He had brought Liam a drawing today, the first one he'd made in months. A drawing of their new, strange, little trio. Leo had pointed to the smiling, sun-headed woman. "That's Elara," he'd said. "She fixed Captain Gus." Liam felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Gratitude, yes, but also a deep, unsettling shame. This woman, a stranger he had plucked from desperation, had accomplished in 2 weeks what he had failed to do in 2 years. She had made his son feel seen. He had kept his distance, retreating into the safety of their employer-employee relationship. It was easier, safer. To let her get any closer felt like a betrayal of Sarah's memory. It felt dangerous. His heart was a locked room, and he had long since thrown away the key. Restless, he left the study and headed towards the kitchen for a glass of water. As he entered the dark, cavernous space, a soft glow from the small lamp over the sink illuminated a figure sitting at the island. It was Elara. She was in a simple gray sweatshirt and pants, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was staring into a mug of tea, her expression lost and distant. She looked just as haunted as she had that first day in the cafeteria. She hadn't heard him approach. He saw the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted the mug. "You can't sleep either?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, the familiar look of a frightened animal. It twisted something in his gut. "Mr. Sterling," she breathed, starting to get up. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Stay," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Please, it's your kitchen as much as it is mine." He moved to the cabinet and got a glass. "And please, call me Liam." She settled back onto the stool, but remained tense, watchful. He filled his glass with water and leaned against the counter opposite her, creating a deliberate, non-threatening distance between them. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken things. "Leo showed me his drawing," Liam said finally, breaking the tension. "Thank you for fixing his toy, for everything." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "He's a wonderful boy." "He is," Liam agreed. "He's just had a hard time." "I know what that's like," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She stared down into her tea again, as if the answers were written in the swirling leaves. Liam found himself wanting to know. He wanted to understand the source of the sorrow in her eyes. It was a dangerous curiosity. "Elara," he began, testing his own name on his lips. "You don't have to answer this, but the first day we met, you were so afraid. It was more than just being afraid of losing your job. Who were you afraid of?" He saw her flinch. Her whole body went rigid. She hugged her arms around herself, a protective gesture. He had crossed a line. He immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That was inappropriate. Forget I asked." She was silent for a long moment. He thought she would flee, but then she took a deep, shuddering breath. "My husband," she said, the words small and brittle. "My ex-husband." She finally looked at him, and the raw pain in her eyes was so profound it felt like he was looking into an open wound. "His name was Mark," she began, her voice gaining a strange, flat quality, the sound of someone recounting a story that has been replayed 1,000 times in the dark. "He was charming. Everyone loved him. When we first met, I thought he was the most wonderful man in the world. He made me feel like I was the only person who mattered." She looked down at her hands. "The change was so gradual I barely noticed it. First it was small criticisms, my clothes, my friends. Then he convinced me to quit my job to take care of him. He took over the finances. He said I was bad with money. He isolated me. Slowly, until he was my entire world. And once he was, that's when the cage locked." Liam listened, his own glass forgotten. He stood perfectly still, a silent witness. "The house was beautiful, like this one," she said with a humorless smile. "But it was a prison. He controlled everything. What I ate, who I spoke to, if I displeased him. His anger was explosive. It wasn't always physical. The words were worse. He knew how to dismantle a person, piece by piece. He made me believe I was worthless, stupid, that no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky he put up with me." A tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped it away with an angry, impatient gesture. "I lost everything, my savings, my self-respect, my friends. I lost myself. One day he threw a plate at my head because the dinner was cold. It missed, but something inside me just broke. I realized he was going to kill me. Maybe not that day, but someday. Slowly or quickly, he was going to erase me completely. So I ran," she whispered. "I waited until he was on a business trip, and I ran with nothing. I've been hiding ever since, terrified he'll find me, terrified of what he'll do if he does." She finally fell silent, her confession hanging in the air between them. The sterile, quiet kitchen was suddenly filled with the echoes of her pain. Liam felt a cold, hard rage solidify in his chest, an anger so fierce it almost choked him. He wanted to find this man, this monster, and make him pay for every tear, every moment of fear. But he pushed it down. That wasn't what she needed. She needed to be heard. He moved from the counter and sat on the stool next to hers, closing the distance between them. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "You are incredibly brave. What you did, escaping, that took a strength I can't even imagine." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "You asked me why I brought you here," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "The truth is, I recognized something in you, and in Leo." He took a breath, the locked door of his own heart creaking open an inch. "My wife, Sarah, she died 2 years ago. A car accident. It was sudden. 1 minute she was here, the next she was gone." He stared at the smooth, cold surface of the island, seeing a ghost. "She was the light of this house, the light of my life. When she died, the light went out. For me, and for Leo. I didn't know how to be a father without her. I only knew how to be a CEO. So I buried myself in work. I thought if I provided for him, that would be enough. I thought I could protect him from the sadness." He shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "But I was just protecting myself. I couldn't bear to look at him because he has her eyes. And every time I looked at him, I saw her. I saw everything I had lost, so I kept my distance. I let the house get cold and silent. I let him get lonely." He finally met her gaze. His own eyes were glistening now. "This house isn't a home, Elara. It's a memorial, and Leo and I have been living in it like ghosts. Until you came," he finished softly. "You brought your cookies and your wild flowers and your quiet kindness, and for the first time in 2 years, I feel a flicker of warmth. You're not just feeding my son, you're healing him. You're healing this house." And me, he thought, but didn't say. In the quiet of the vast kitchen, 2 broken souls sat in the dim light, their shared wounds laid bare. The distance between them had vanished, replaced by a fragile, tentative bridge of understanding. She reached out, her trembling hand covering his on the counter. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a simple, profound act of human connection, of shared survival. "You're not ghosts," she whispered. "You're just waiting for the sun to rise." And for the first time, Liam Sterling felt a sliver of hope that she might be right. The warmth didn't last. Peace was a fragile, fleeting thing. Elara knew this better than anyone. For a few weeks, the house on the hill became a true sanctuary. The late-night confession had changed everything. The silence between her and Liam was no longer awkward, but comfortable. It was filled with a shared understanding. He started coming home earlier. He would find her and Leo in the garden, or building a complex Lego structure on the living room floor. And he wouldn't retreat to his study. He would watch, a small, tentative smile on his face. Sometimes he would even join in. The house began to fill with laughter. Leo's bright, childish giggles, and even Elara's, a sound she had thought was lost to her forever. She felt herself unfurling, like a flower that had been deprived of sun. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was quieter now. She was starting to believe she could be safe. She was starting to feel like she belonged. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. Liam was featured in a prominent business magazine, a cover story. Liam Sterling, the man rebuilding the tech world. There was a picture of him on the cover, powerful and handsome, and inside, a multi-page spread. Most of it was about his company, but there was a small, personal section. It mentioned he was a widower, a devoted single father to his son, Leo. And then the sentence that made her blood run cold. Sources say the Sterling household has recently been revitalized by the presence of a mysterious new addition, a private cook named Elara, who has reportedly won the heart of young Leo. It was a throwaway line, a bit of human interest gossip. To her it was a death sentence. Her name. They had used her name. She stared at the magazine, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it. He would see it. Mark would see it. He followed the world of business and power with an obsessive envy. He would absolutely see an article on Liam Sterling, and he would see her name. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. It was a physical thing, a vice gripping her chest, making it impossible to breathe. The house, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. The beautiful glass walls were no longer protective. They were transparent, leaving her exposed. She had brought her past to their doorstep. She had endangered them. She had endangered Leo. Mark was a predator. He would see Liam's wealth, his power, and he would see Elara as his ticket to it. He would come for her. Not out of love, but out of a twisted sense of ownership. She was his property, and she was living in another man's palace. His rage would be boundless. She had to go. She had to disappear again. Before he found her, before he could hurt them. Her mind worked with the frantic, desperate clarity of pure terror. She waited until Liam was on a conference call in his study, and Leo was in his room, listening to an audiobook. She ran to her suite, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't pack. There was no time. Possessions didn't matter. Escape was all that mattered. She scribbled a note, her hand shaking. Liam, I am so sorry. I have to leave. I can't explain why, but staying here puts you and Leo in danger. Please, don't look for me. It's safer for everyone this way. Thank you for everything. Elara. It was pathetic, inadequate, but it was all she could manage. She left the note on the pristine white duvet of her bed. With one last agonizing look at the room that had been her haven, she turned and fled. She took nothing but the small purse she owned, containing a few dollars and her fake ID. She slipped out the back service door, her feet silent on the stone patio. She ran across the vast lawn, heading for the line of trees at the edge of the property. If she could make it to the main road, she could flag down a car, a bus, anything. The wind was cold, tearing at her thin sweater. The old familiar chill was back, consuming her. She was almost to the tree line when she heard her name being called. Elara. It was Liam. His voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the wind. She didn't stop. She broke into a full sprint, tears of terror and grief streaming down her face. She couldn't let him stop her. She was poison. She would ruin him. But he was faster. He caught up to her just as she reached the shadows of the first trees, his hand closing gently but firmly around her arm. "Let me go," she cried, struggling against his grip. "Please, Liam, you don't understand. You have to let me go." "No," he said, his voice breathless but resolute. He turned her to face him. His face was a mask of confusion and concern. "No, I won't. Talk to me. What's wrong? What happened?" "I can't," she sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. "He'll find me. He'll see the magazine. He'll come here and he'll hurt you. He'll hurt Leo." Understanding dawned on his face, quickly followed by a dark, protective fury. "Mark," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "This is about him." "I have to go," she pleaded, her voice breaking. It's the only way to keep you safe." "You think running is the answer?" he demanded, his grip on her arms tightening, holding her steady. "You think letting him chase you from place to place for the rest of your life is a solution? You think leaving us is keeping us safe?" He pulled her closer, his eyes boring into hers. "Listen to me. The day I brought you into my home, I took on a responsibility for you. Your safety is my safety. Your past is my past now. We are in this together." "But you don't know him," she cried. "You don't know what he's capable of." "And he doesn't know me," Liam countered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "He is a bully who preys on the vulnerable. He has never come up against someone like me. I will not let him touch you. I will not let him harm my family." "My family." The words struck her with the force of a tidal wave, stealing the breath from her lungs. He had said my family. He meant her. "You are not leaving," he stated, his voice an iron declaration of intent. "You are not running. You are staying here, behind me, and I will handle this." He looked at her, his expression softening as he saw the utter shock on her face. "Elara, your fight is over. Let me fight for you now." He wrapped his arms around her trembling form, pulling her into an embrace that was not gentle or comforting, but fierce. It was an embrace of pure, unyielding protection. It was the embrace of a fortress. She buried her face in his chest, her frantic sobs finally giving way to deep, shuddering breaths. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the monster alone. She had a protector, a champion. She had let him in, and now he was standing at the gate, refusing to let the darkness follow. He wasn't pushing her away to save himself. He was pulling her closer. He was choosing her. Publicly, definitively, and without hesitation. The fight wasn't over. She knew that, but for the first time, she believed it was a fight she might actually win. Liam's promise was not an empty one. It was a declaration of war. He moved with a speed and efficiency that was terrifying to behold. The moment they were back inside the house, he transformed from the gentle, grieving man she knew into the formidable CEO from the magazine cover. He sat her down on the sofa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and handed her a cup of hot, sweet tea. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Then he got on the phone. His first call was to the head of his personal security team, a formidable ex-Special Forces operative. "I want a full detail on the house, effective immediately, 24/7 surveillance. No one gets on this property without my direct authorization. And I want a protection detail assigned to Elara. She is not to be left alone. Ever." His next call was to the best private investigator in the country. "I have a name for you. Mark Thorne. I want everything. I want every skeleton in his closet, every unpaid bill, every shady business deal, every complaint ever filed against him. I want to know where he is, who he talks to, and what he eats for. Breakfast. Spare no expense." His final call was to his lead counsel, a shark of a woman known for her merciless litigation. "I need you to prepare a restraining order. The target is Mark Thorne. The client is Elara Vance. I'm sending you the investigator's initial file. I want it airtight and I want it filed yesterday." Elara watched him, awestruck. He was a force of nature. He was wielding his power and his wealth not as weapons of aggression, but as an impenetrable shield. He was building a wall around her, brick by brick. When he was done, he came and sat beside her. The fierce CEO was gone, replaced once again by the concerned man. "He will not get near you," Liam said, his voice a low, steady vow. "I promise." The next few days were surreal. Discreet, professional security guards patrolled the grounds. Elara felt trapped, but it was the trapping of a sanctuary, not a prison. Liam worked from home, his presence a constant, reassuring anchor. The investigators' reports started coming in, and they were uglier than even Elara had imagined. Mark was drowning in debt. He had been fired from his last 2 jobs for inappropriate conduct. There were whispers of other women, other abuses, all settled quietly out of court. He was a desperate man, and desperate men were dangerous. The investigator also confirmed her worst fears. Mark had seen the magazine. He had been making inquiries, trying to find a way to contact Liam Sterling. He was sniffing around the edges of their lives, looking for a way in. The restraining order was served. Mark's reaction was explosive. He started a smear campaign. He contacted tabloid reporters, feeding them a fabricated story of a gold-digging employee who had seduced a grieving billionaire, a mentally unstable woman who had abandoned her loving husband. The headlines were cruel and invasive. Billionaire's new love, a troubled past. Shame washed over Elara. This was exactly what she had feared. She was bringing scandal and ugliness into Liam and Leo's pristine world. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Liam one evening, holding up a tablet with a vile new article. "I've ruined your reputation." Liam took the tablet from her and tossed it onto the couch without a second glance. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Do you think I care about that?" he asked, his voice intense. "Do you think I care what faceless strangers write about me? The only opinions that matter to me in this world are yours and Leo's. Let them write what they want. They are gnats buzzing at a window. They can't get in." His unwavering loyalty was a balm on her wounded soul. He was not ashamed of her. He was not ashamed to be associated with her messy, broken past. The final confrontation came not with a bang, but with a legal filing. Armed with the investigators' damning evidence of financial fraud and a witness from Mark's last job willing to testify, Liam's lawyers didn't just enforce the restraining order. They went on the offensive. They presented Mark with a choice: face criminal prosecution for his financial crimes and public exposure for his history of abuse, or sign a legally binding agreement to never contact, approach, or mention Elara Vance or the Sterling family again in any capacity for the rest of his life. Faced with total ruin, Mark folded. He signed the papers. It was over. The call from the lawyer came on a Friday afternoon. Liam took it in his study. When he came out, his face was calm. The storm in his eyes finally settled. He found Elara in the kitchen, frosting a cake with Leo. Her hands were steady now. There was color in her cheeks. The haunted look in her eyes was almost gone, replaced by a quiet, peaceful light. "It's done," Liam said simply. "He's gone. He can't ever hurt you again." Elara looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. But for the first time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. A weight she had carried for years, a burden that had shaped her every move, had finally been lifted. She was free, truly, finally free. Leo, oblivious to the adult gravity of the moment but sensitive to the emotional shift, looked from his father's face to Elara's. "Are you crying because you're happy, Elara?" he asked. She laughed through her tears, a beautiful, liberating sound. "Yes, Leo. I'm crying because I'm very, very happy." Later that evening, after Leo was asleep, Liam found her sitting by the large window in the living room, looking out at the stars. The security guards were gone. The house was quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet now. He came and stood behind her. "I never thought this was possible," she said softly. "To feel light, to not be looking over my shoulder." She turned to look up at him. "How can I ever thank you?" "There's nothing to thank me for," he said. "Protecting you? It felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt like protecting my own heart." The admission hung in the air between them, shimmering and real. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is probably too soon," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "And the last thing I want is for you to feel pressured or obligated. You've just found your freedom, and I don't want to cage you again." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, clear diamond that shone like a captured star. It wasn't a massive, ostentatious stone. It was delicate, perfect. "This house was just a building," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This family was just two sad, lonely people. You came and you filled it with warmth and laughter and life. You made it a home. You didn't just heal Leo. You healed me." He got down on one knee, an act of profound vulnerability that made her heart ache. "I know I can't replace the love you've lost, and you can't replace the love I've lost," he said, his eyes pleading with hers. "But maybe we can build something new together, something beautiful, a new family, a new future." He held the ring up to her. "Elara Vance, would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? Would you and Leo and would you let us be a family?" The question was not a demand. It was a gentle, hopeful offering. He was giving her the choice, the power she had never had. From the doorway, a small voice piped up. "You should say yes, Elara. Then you can be my mom for real." It was Leo, standing there in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He had clearly snuck out of bed to see what was happening. Elara looked from Liam's hopeful, loving face to Leo's innocent, expectant one, her two protectors, her new beginning. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she nodded, her voice a choked whisper. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." The wedding was not a grand affair. There were no magazine photographers, no crowds of society guests. It was held in the garden, the one Elara had so lovingly tended to, coaxing life and color from the dormant soil. The only guests were Maria, the kind housekeeper, and Liam's head of security, who stood at a respectful distance. Elara wore a simple, cream-colored dress that flowed around her as she walked. She wasn't the fragile, trembling woman who had first entered this house. Her shoulders were back, her head was held high. There was a quiet strength in her, a radiance that came from a place of deep, settled peace. Liam stood waiting for her under an arch of white roses. He wore a simple suit, but his eyes on her were more dazzling than any jewel. The grief that had shadowed his face for so long was gone, replaced by a look of profound love and contentment. But the most important person there stood between them, holding both their hands. Leo, in a tiny, perfect tuxedo, served as the ring-bearer, the best man, and the official witness. He carried the rings on a small satin pillow, his face a mask of solemn importance. When the officiant asked for the rings, Leo presented them with a proud flourish. As Liam slid the simple gold band onto Elara's finger, beside the sparkling diamond, Leo beamed. They kept the vows simple, heartfelt words spoken only for each other. Promises not of fairy tale perfection, but of partnership, of shared burdens and shared joys, of building a future on a foundation of healed wounds and chosen love. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Liam didn't kiss his bride first. He knelt, opening his arms. Elara knelt beside him, and Leo launched himself into their arms, completing the circle. They held each other, a solid, unbreakable unit, the three of them finally, formally a family. Life in the house on the hill transformed. The magnificent, empty spaces filled up with the beautiful clutter of a lived-in, loved-in home. Leo's toys were a permanent fixture in the living room. Elara's gardening books were piled on the coffee table. The sterile air was permanently scented with something delicious baking in the oven. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of Leo's laughter as Liam chased him through the halls, the sound of Elara reading stories aloud, the sound of music playing softly in the evenings. One afternoon, months later, Elara was in the kitchen packing Leo's lunch for school the next day. It was no longer a clinical, pre-packaged meal. It was a bento box filled with his favorite things, a small note tucked inside. Liam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "The school cafeteria," she said, a small, wistful smile on her face. "I was thinking about that single slice of bread." "I think about it every day," he confessed, his voice quiet. "It reminds me of how close I came to never finding you." She turned in his arms, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "You didn't find me, Liam. We found each other. We were all lost, and we found each other." On the wall of the kitchen, in a simple, elegant frame, was a crayon drawing. A tall man, a small boy, and a woman with a smiling son for a head, all holding hands. It was a reminder of where they had started, a map that had led them out of the darkness. It was proof that sometimes the most broken pieces, when put together with kindness and patience, don't just rebuild what was lost. They build something far more beautiful.